Welcome to How to Self-Edit and When to Hire a Pro. I'm Nick Nelson, Senior Editor and Head Coach at Wordsmith Writing Coaches, and we help you tell your story well and publish wisely. An important part of telling your story well is mastering the craft of writing. The central act of the writing craft is what happens between cranking out that first draft and sending out that final draft. Of course, there's much more to the writing process than simply writing. I'm assuming that you all know something about what is often called the PDREP process: pre-writing, drafting, editing, polishing, and other stuff. Preparation and pre-writing are a whole set of skills and issues, and polishing and formatting are a whole set of skills and issues, but sandwiched between them is the actual writing. After the preparation and the pre-writing, you have to draft the whole thing, whether it's a poem or flash fiction or a full-length epic novel. That first draft gets a whole step of its own. Then comes revision and editing, which are cyclical kinds of things, and we'll consider them simultaneously in this workshop. Think of revision and editing as a spiral. First, you're doing just enough copy editing to enable coherent revision, and then you're doing just enough revision to serve that editing process. So that's what we'll tackle today: how to do this yourself and when you'll want to hire a pro to do it instead. So let me begin by giving you 8 tips. If you tune out all the rest of this talk, at least write these down. These are gold. First, learn how to look at your own work objectively. William Zinser famously said, "Writers who think they are being criticized when only their writing is being criticized are beyond a teacher's reach." Writing can only be learned when a writer coldly separates himself from what he has written and looks at it with the objectivity of a plumber examining a newly piped bathroom to see if he got all the joints tight. It is extremely difficult to see your work objectively when you're in the middle of creating it. That's why we tell you not to edit or revise while you're drafting. Get all the words and ideas out first, and then shift gears and revise and edit later. This shifting gears from writing mode to self-editing mode almost always requires a period of time, whether a day or a week or several months. Different writers need different periods of time. Know yourself. One of the best ways to develop your ability to look at your own writing objectively is to practice editing other people's stuff. Of course, you can see their work objectively. You didn't write it. But as your editing muscles are exercised on other people's work, your inner editor will grow accustomed to looking at writing objectively, not overly critically and not overly defensively either. It's a good context to learn to see mistakes and poor writing craft just as practical problems to be solved, not moral failings to be condemned. When you apply that practical perspective and those mental muscles that you've developed to your own work, you'll be less emotionally attached to how you've written it, and you'll see more clearly what exactly you've written. But how will you know how to fix these problems? First, calibrate your brain with great writing, especially in the topic or genre that you want to write in. This means reading the best writers that you can get your hands on, savor their work, reread the parts that impress you, and notice how the author managed to do that. No need to do a rhetorical analysis, just soak in it and let your subconscious mind grow intimately familiar with that kind of use of language. This is also how you learn to write in specific accents or dialects and in different character voices. Soak in those accents. You enjoy them, you savor them, you practice repeating distinctive phrases aloud to yourself. And then, when you're trying to express something similar in your own writing and you get stuck, your mind is more likely to remember how it was done by the great authors. And those phrasings, those tones and expressions, that kind of pacing, distinctive pacing, will come to you when you need it. This is the sense in which great writing is caught, not taught. Of course, it can be taught too. That's what we do at Wordsmith Writing Coaches. And in this case, I would suggest analyzing key passages and scenes from brilliant examples of your target genre, and then try to rewrite those scenes from memory without looking at the original passage. That's a terrific way to train your writing instincts. It will also dispel forever the fear that you might be accused of plagiarism if you copy another author's ideas and write them in your own words. If you can't do that successfully, even when you're trying, you certainly won't plagiarize when you're just stealing other people's ideas to serve your own story, which you're telling in your own way. Next, learn to short circuit temporary stress-induced semiosis. Yeah, that's a thing. So, those times when you've really struggled to express something, usually when you're writing a paper that's due in an hour, and you get up to make a sandwich or something and you come back down and you look at what you just wrote and it doesn't make any sense. But it did make sense to you just 10 minutes ago. This is stress-induced semiosis. Without getting too deep in the weeds, semiosis is the process of your brain attaching meaning to symbols. When you've got an amorphous idea in your head that you're really trying to express in words, your brain will sometimes impute that amorphous idea to those words that you have just written or that you're just writing, whatever the words are. So in that moment, you think, okay, that'll work. Because whatever you just wrote, your brain is attaching that meaning to it. And when you look at it, you see that meaning that you wanted the sentence to carry. But this is temporary semiosis. So the effect fades away pretty quickly, especially if you shift to a different task that uses a different part of your brain, like making a sandwich. So as you're reading your rough draft and you come across something that just doesn't make any sense, now you know what happened. This is an actual thing that your brain does when it is stressed out, especially if you're sleep deprived. Don't worry about your sanity, you're fine now, but the section that suffered from this is going to have to be reimagined and rewritten. And aren't you glad that you're doing it yourself and you have not shown this to your critique group or an editor yet? So how do you short circuit this effect? How do you stop it from happening? When you realize your brain is fuzzy, get some sleep. Second, when you wake up, drink a whole glass of water. Seriously, that will help you stay hydrated all day long. And your brain functions badly when it's dehydrated. I mean, you're going to need to keep drinking water during the day, but if you start with a whole glass of water, just trust me, things work better. Third, when you find yourself pushing those words out, don't try so hard to make that one written sentence carry all the information and meaning and nuance that that one thought does in your head. Write one bad sentence that, gives it a shot, then write another version of that sentence that gets at it in a different way. Write a third or a fourth sentence if you need to. The same sentence or the same idea expressed different ways each time. Just leave them all on the page for now and just keep going. You'll sort it all out during revision. And when you do revise, you won't come along a word salad that came out of stress-induced semiosis. You'll come across 3 or 4 or maybe 5 different attempts to write a particular sentence that was just really hard to capture that meaning and nuance that you're really shooting for. You'll sort it all out during revision, don't worry. The next tip I have for you is to read it aloud to yourself or have someone else read it aloud to you. Siri or Alexa could do it in a pinch. This is because your auditory cortex, your oral vestibular lobes, process language differently from your visual cortex. And hearing text read aloud will almost always call your attention to problems that your eyes overlooked. Of course, the reverse is true. When you see something written, that's when you notice all the misspellings. You discover the misspellings that were hidden in the audible reading of a text. But really, try this. It works like magic. Make yourself listen to one scene at a time or to one chapter at a time, noting and correcting the mistakes or the awkward phrasings as you hear them. Which brings me to the next pro tip. Assess your entire manuscript for just one thing at a time, one pass at a time. This is a habit that you quickly pick up when you're critiquing or editing other people's work because it's so much more efficient and effective than crawling slowly through the whole thing, trying to fix everything at once as you creep along. I mean, you might begin that way for the first few pages perhaps, but you'll soon realize, dang, here's something I need to address all the way through. And it won't be as easy as using find and replace to spell a name consistently all the way through the manuscript. And that's fine. Write that down on a bit of scratch paper and hold that reminder in front of you as you zoom through the entire manuscript looking for that one thing everywhere that you can find it. Fix it as soon as you see it. If you can, That's great. If you can't, at least flag it for future attention. And then go back to the beginning and choose a new issue to pursue all the way through the manuscript. So you'll be doing one or two or maybe three closely related things in mind at a time. And you'll go all the way through the entire manuscript just looking for those things. And then when you're done, you hit save, you go back and you choose another issue to follow all the way through, one pass at a time. Now, of course, the search function can help with some of these things, like a habitual overuse of the word that. Search for that and click all the way through, looking at every single occurrence and deciding whether or not you need to keep it or delete it. But other things like overuse of passive voice, a search bar is not going to help you with that. You just need to make your way all the way through your manuscript, hunting for opportunities to change passive verbs to active ones, rewriting sentences, maybe whole paragraphs, and dialogue as you go. This is when that reminder comes in handy, that written reminder that I want you to have in front of you while you're doing this. Without that reminder, it's very easy to lose your way. Don't worry, you'll get to all that other stuff later. It's going to be really tempting to get into rewriting and revising everything else that you see as you're going along, but you'll get to it later, just one pass at a time for now. Next, build a style sheet as you go along. This is something every professional editor uses but doesn't usually talk about with clients. We don't normally show our style sheets to our clients because style sheets are messy. They're kind of personal things that are not usually ready for public view. But they are the only way I know how to keep track of all the innumerable decisions that you have to make as you go along editing a work, especially if you're working on a team with other editors and you're going to edit this document and then pass it along to the next editor. Oh my goodness, you definitely want them to have your style sheet so that they won't go through the whole thing taking out all the Oxford commas that you just laboriously put in. So a style sheet is the only way I know to keep track of all the decisions. Like you'll use a style sheet to gradually build a glossary of names and epithets and terms, which ones are used by which characters, because they'll change as the POV changes to help each character develop their own distinct voice on the page. You'll keep track of notes about spelling and capitalization and italics and diacritical marks or special characters. You'll keep notes about foreshadowing and setup for both the plot arc and for the character arcs. You can keep notes in your style sheet for how to handle headings and subheadings if you have them, or diagrams or maps or illustrations, sidebars, pull quotes. The list goes on. You'll also want to keep their notes for making chapter leads consistent. If you have like a little quote or a poem or some kind of brief meta text at the beginning of a chapter or at the beginning of different sections of a longer work, you want to format them all, and you also want to probably write them similarly. Write down in the style sheet how you're handling those quotes or poems or whatever. And everything else that comes up as you're going through your manuscript and making editorial decisions. Every decision you make that you want to remember as you go along should go into the style sheet. I don't know how anyone maintains continuity in any novel length work without a style sheet, to say nothing of writing a trilogy or a longer series. So next, make a new document every time you finish a significant set of changes or begin a new set of edits. Another hallmark of the tyro is only having one document for their novel, one single version of their manuscript. What if you change your mind about deleting a scene? You're going to rely on undo to march back through all the other changes to get to the previous version of that scene? And you'll be regaining that lost scene only by losing all the other valuable changes that you've made since then. Of course, you can go overboard with this and wind up with hundreds of manuscript versions and no idea how to navigate through them all to find the one version of that scene that you want to retrieve. It's normal for my clients to wind up with between 4 and 7 variants between the first one that they send to me and the last one that goes to the publisher or the agent. Sometimes we've generated as many as 15 different edit versions going back and forth between us as the author explores different possible narrative paths. Doing this on your own, I can easily imagine just as many variants before you get to the point of hiring a pro. But the more work you've done on your own, the fewer variants will probably be generated in the editing process. Ideally, only 3. The draft you send me, the revision draft, and then the copy editing and proofreading draft that goes to the formatter if you're self-publishing, thus generating yet another document, or to your agent or publisher if you're going the traditional route. Again, keeping the different variants gives you the ability to quickly go back in time to a previous version and begin afresh from there, just in case those major revisions that you made led to a dead end. This doesn't happen very often, but hard drives don't crash very often either, and you still back up all your files, right? So back up your major versions of your manuscript too. Related to this, I strongly recommend keeping a scratch file or a fodder file for deleted scenes, unused dialogue and description, others of your darlings on death row. I mean, why kill your darlings when you can simply lock them away in a fodder file from which they might escape into future newsletters or short stories? These tips will go a long way towards making you an effective self-editor. I have more tips and an assortment of books and things that I want to describe and recommend to you, but we'll save that for the discussion if we get to them. Now let's look at the different kinds of editing that you can hire an editor to do, and I'll tell you a few ways that you can do each of them yourself. This can be a little confusing because the labels can differ and the boundaries can blur a bit between the terms. But once you're familiar with these general ideas, you can have an intelligent conversation about them. And having these mental models in your head can help you think more clearly and precisely about the editing process and when you might want or need to shift from doing it yourself to hiring a pro. So, developmental editing. This is all about revision. It involves the story or the argument as a whole. Is this whole thing, is it coherent? Does it have all the parts that it needs? Are all the parts arranged effectively? And have you removed all the unnecessary parts? Revision is what you're doing when you're acting on developmental insights. The trick is, how do I recognize these things myself without having to hire a developmental editor? Well, first, you need to get into the developmental mindset. Having just finished your first draft of the thing, you've been immersed in the fine details of your story. That's a terrible context for developmental editing. Revision must precede editing, or you'll get lost in the churn between the two, and you're never going to finish your manuscript. So, put the manuscript away for a while, like I said before, like at least several days. Some writers won't look at it for months, in order to ensure that you have the kind of objective developmental perspective that you need to begin the revision process properly. Experiment with this, figure this out for yourself. Trust your feelings. Each person is different. But do not listen to those urgent feelings that are screaming in your mind. Tomorrow you have to get right back to it and you have to begin revising it. That's the inner editor. It's not time for that mindset yet. Shut that voice down. Tell it to take a vacation and come back after the revision process has had a fair shot at the story. Okay? Next, think about all the things that you wanted to achieve with this story in the beginning. Look back at your pre-writing. Look at the lead that you wrote, the story kernel that convinced you, yeah, this is going to be a worthwhile story to tell. Go back and read the elevator pitch that helped you clarify how the plot and character arcs should unfold. And now compare those things to what you've written. Did you achieve the mood and the atmosphere, the genre feel that you were going for? Does your plot achieve its emotional goal with the reader? Does it terrify or comfort or thrill and inspire? Did you move them to tears or laughter or deep introspection? Whatever it was that was your goal, ask yourself, will my story work its magic on anyone else besides myself? If you aren't sure, that's fine. Guess. Look for places in the story that definitely don't work and try to fix those. But if you have no clue at all, it's already time to hire a pro. Now, you could ask for full-fledged developmental editing, which can become expensive. Um, it's very helpful, but it can become expensive. And if it's still early in the process, it might not actually be appropriate for that yet. So you can just ask for something called a manuscript critique. A good manuscript critique only costs between $250 and $500, and it will answer all these questions for you and more. And a good critique will answer these questions in very specific ways, giving you practical recommendations for how you can fix these problems yourself. Then you take that professional input and you go back to work doing your self-editing, doing the revision process. Go back to the revision process. When you do feel like you've finished the revision process as much as you're able to, maybe you went out and got a professional critique of your manuscript, but you're still managing to contain the costs here, and you feel like, okay, I'm done with that. Now it's ready to, you're ready to shift into another kind of editing that you can hire professionals to do, which is called copy editing or line editing. So now that the content is all straightened out, you can begin editing each paragraph, dialing in each sentence, considering every word and nuance. This is why you don't want to waste your time on this when there's a chance you might cut that whole scene and start over. So this is where you definitely do all these 8 things I suggested and whatever else helps you comb out the tangles. Beware of jumping to the conclusion that you need to hire a pro just because the revision and editing process is taking you too long. If it's taking you too long because you're helplessly tangled in your own web, by all means, look for an editor or a writing coach who can help you gain traction again. This revision and editing cycle, it does take a long time, and that's okay. Just keep plugging away. When you've taken it as far as you can take it, then you're ready to hire a pro for sure. Best-selling author and award-winning book critic Charles Finch says, "To me, the single biggest mark of the amateur writer is a sense of hurry. Hurry to finish a manuscript, hurry to edit it, hurry to publish it. For most authors, the single greatest ally we have is time. There's no page of prose in existence that its author can't improve after it's been in a drawer for a week. The same is true on the macro level. Every time I finish a story or a book, I try to put it away and forget it for as long as I can. When I return, its problems are often so obvious and easy to fix that I'm amazed I ever struggled with them." Short-circuiting this revision process and going straight to copy editing is the hallmark of the novice writer or the novice editor. It's also known as putting lipstick on a pig, which we don't want to do. Okay, let's get to the key question. When do you finally cross the Rubicon and hire a professional editor? There are some general rules, but the actual decision is going to be purely subjective. Um, but a couple of questions that you'll want to ask yourself. First, have you taken the manuscript as far as you can yourself? Are you sick of working on your finished manuscript over and over and you need a fresh pair of eyes to look at it? Or have you simply done the things that you know how to do in self-editing and you've completed every pass and it feels pretty good? At that point, you're ready to hire a pro. Second question to ask yourself. Do you have a specific goal in mind for this manuscript? Is there a submission deadline for a contest? Are you preparing it to show agents and acquisition editors so there is no firm deadline? If you're doing self-publishing, do you have a publication plan, a fan base building plan for before and after the book launch, a specific trim size and format for the book? Do you have an idea for what time of year might be best for launching your book? Now, you don't need this path of publication all sorted out in all of its details before you hire an editor. But if you do have such a plan and you happen to know your target audience pretty well, your editor can help you appeal to that audience as effectively as possible. Third question to ask yourself before you hire a pro is, have you done any taste testing of editors? The taste testing idea is a great place to begin. Often what you hear in a free initial consultation or in a 15-minute pro critique at a writer's conference or from a manuscript critique that you've paid for, often just that input will be enough to get you back on track with your self-editing process. It will also give you some idea of who you do and don't want to work with when you surrender your entire manuscript for a full round of edits. Generally, you'll want to have your manuscript professionally edited before you submit it to an agent or an acquisitions editor or for a contest. But you do not want to pay for a full-fledged professional editing if you're going to make a lot of changes to the manuscript after that. If you pay for professional editing, do your best to publish and sell that version. You've invested in it, see whether it will pay you back to some degree. And then if you want to make a lot of new changes and tweaks, that's your second edition. Have that edition professionally edited or proofread at the very least, and publish a second edition that gives the first edition a little more cachet. So once you have crossed your Rubicon, though, there are ways to work with a professional editor that will continue to help you with your self-editing. And the process becomes even richer when that editor is also a writing coach. We can talk about that later. Let me close with a quote from William Zinser, one of my favorite writing mentors. Learn to enjoy this tidying process. I don't like to write, I like to have written, but I love to rewrite. By rewrite, he means I love to revise and edit in the context of what we've been saying just now. So back to Zinser. I especially like to cut, to press the delete key and see an unnecessary word or phrase or sentence vanish into the electricity. I like to replace a humdrum word with one that has more precision or color. I like to strengthen that transition between one sentence and another. I like to rephrase a drab sentence to give it a more pleasing rhythm or a more graceful musical line. With every small refinement, I feel that I'm coming nearer to where I would like to arrive. And when I finally get there, I know it was the rewriting, not the writing, that won the game. That's the last and best tip for self-editing. Don't look at it as torture or drudgery. Enjoy it. Take delight in the process. Tell your story well and publish wisely.